On behalf of the Committee, Conservation Ontario, and the University of Guelph, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on ecological monitoring tools. I'm speaking to you from Guelph, so I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Guelph is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Today, I acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples from whose traditional territory I'm speaking to you. But I know that I am speaking to people who are joining us today from many places near and far, and would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. The success of last year's Latornell Leadership Project webinar series showed us that despite, or perhaps because of our still very limited opportunities to network face-to-face, as a community of practice, we still need a space to meet, to share our accomplishments, our challenges, our innovations, and our lessons learned as we work to protect the environment. And I hope that you find today's webinar fills some of that gap. This webinar is the 5th in our Conservation Matters series. Over the fall of this year, we've been bringing you sessions on watershed management, ecological offsetting, conservation areas programming, and Indigenous-led land conservation movements. If you've missed any of the webinars held earlier this fall, you can find the recordings on the Latornell website, as well as the recordings of our webinar series from last year. Now, I'd like to introduce the moderator of today's session, Sarah Hotchkiss. Sarah is the Manager of Planning and Natural Heritage at the St. Clair Region Conservation Authority in Southwestern Ontario. As part of the Planning and Regulations Department, Sarah provides input to the development, review, and implementation of environmental policies for the watershed. Through the development process, Sarah works with municipalities, landowners, and developers to prevent and mitigate negative impacts on the natural heritage system. Sarah has spent her career working in the conservation field as an environmental educator and ecologist for various government and nonprofit organizations, and we're happy to have her in her second year on the Latornell Steering Committee. Outside of work, Sarah also sits on the board of directors of the Thames Talbot Land Trust. And in anticipation of this webinar, she's been spending time over the last several months learning how to use various apps for plant, animal, and fungus identification and tracking. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Jan. Good morning, everyone. We have a great turnout. We have over 140 people joining us on Zoom today, and I'm sure there'll be more people who will be watching the webinar after the fact once we have the recording up on our website. As Jan said, my name is Sarah Hotchkiss, and I would like to thank you for joining us today for our Ecological Monitoring Tools webinar. Ecological monitoring is critical for documenting baseline data as a reference point for ecosystem composition and health, for understanding changes over time, and for monitoring the effectiveness of mitigation plans to conserve or restore biodiversity. To help answer key questions on the impacts of ecosystem change across time, good data management and the ability to share information is fundamental. As a conservation community, we often find that our resources are stretched pretty thin. So any tools that we can use to extend our limited resources could be a huge asset. Tapping into the enthusiasm and wide reach of volunteers through community science programs and making monitoring data available through open source platforms will be the focus of our first presentation today. And technology can play a major role in effectively managing and presenting field data, as we'll hear from our second speaker. After each presentation today, we'll have a short discussion of questions from you, our audience, from questions that you submit to our Q&A box. We'll do our best to answer as many of your questions as possible, but you can help us by upvoting questions that are of interest to multiple people. A few housekeeping notes for this morning. First, all of our attendees are muted and you will not be able to speak or turn on your video. You will find the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to ask a question of either of our speakers today, please type it into the box and press enter to have it posted. You can include the name of the presenter that your question is for to help us organize our Q&A session. To upvote a question, press the thumbs up. Feel free to interact with others in the webinar through the chat box. You can introduce yourself and tell us where you're coming from today. And our webinar team are monitoring the Q&A and the chat boxes, and we'll do our best to address your questions throughout the session. To our speakers, a reminder to use your mute button when you're not speaking, and of course, unmute yourself when you are. And this webinar is being recorded so that anyone who is not able to attend live with us today will be able to listen in at a later date. So before I introduce our speakers, let's take a look at the results of our opening poll questions. So it looks like we have a lot of people joining us from the GTA and Southwestern Ontario. And as far as where people are working, we have a good representation from conservation authorities today, as well as NGOs, municipalities, provincial ministries, and others. Are you currently using any digital apps to collect or manage natural heritage data? Most people have entered into looking at one or two programs. Lots aren't, but hopefully after today, we will have a change in those responses. As far as iNaturalist, which we'll be discussing in our first presentation today, we have 38% of people who have downloaded it and tried it out, some who are not familiar at all, and 23% are avid users. So those are our experts in the crowd. Do you have a database or other system for organizing and analyzing field data? Interesting to see that 39% of people are saying no. So hopefully the system that we're going to talk to you about today may be of interest to some of you. 28% have built their own, 14% are using one from another organization. And I'm glad to see that 19% are very excited to learn about the SOFIA system that we'll be discussing today. That's great, everyone. Thanks for sharing those details with us. Now I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker from the Nature Conservancy of Canada, or NCC. Laura Robson is the Conservation Coordinator in NCC's Ontario region. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Biology from the University of Guelph and a Master of Science degree in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology from the University of Toronto. During her many years as a field biologist, Laura has conducted ecological monitoring, land management, and habitat restoration while deepening her love for Ontario's natural heritage. In her current role at NCC, she gets to engage others in conservation through the Ontario region's volunteer and intern programs, and she supports staff with conservation planning. Outside of work, Laura enjoys spending as much time outdoors as possible, hiking, biking, and exploring with her kids. Laura will be speaking today about NCC Ontario's experience using digital tools, including iNaturalist, Collector, and Survey 123 to track data on their properties through their volunteer monitoring programs for use and stewardship of their lands. Welcome, Laura. We're going to turn things over to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I appreciate it. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I'm really grateful to be here. And so as Sarah mentioned, I'm going to be talking today about some of the digital tools that we're using for collecting volunteer monitoring data at the Nature Conservancy of Canada's Ontario region. All right, so I'm going to start by just giving you a bit of an introduction to the Nature Conservancy of Canada. We are Canada's largest land trust. We were founded in 1962, and since that time in Ontario, we've conserved more than 37,000 hectares of land that we actively manage. And you can see on this map, all of these green dots are properties that we own, and the blue dots are conservation easements that we manage. So these are all lands that we're actively caring for. And as you can see, they're spread out quite widely across Ontario, and this number of properties is always growing. And so right now, we actually have a larger staff contingent than we ever have before, working year-round in our stewardship department with 16 year-round staff. However, as you can see, with this huge number of acres, huge number of properties, great geographic spread, we still really rely on volunteers to help us meet our stewardship deliverables and our monitoring needs. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, we have a number of volunteer programs. We have a conservation volunteers program, and that's more of an events-based program, single day public events where we invite out many people to help us on a single restoration action like planting trees or collecting seeds or removing invasive species. But we also have the Volunteer Property Stewards program, and these are more long-term volunteers. They're typically local to our natural areas. They may be neighbors to a property or perhaps members of a local field naturalist club. And they report to our local NCC conservation biologist who's responsible for managing those lands. And they are assigned a set of monitoring and stewardship tasks for that property. And with some sort of regular schedule. That could be as often as every other week or perhaps just twice a year. The types of monitoring tasks that they take on would include monitoring our trails for use, monitoring for dumping, monitoring species too, of course, looking for invasive species, species at risk, doing specific surveys that we require. And they also take on stewardship tasks. These are generally kind of more simple in nature, like repairing boardwalks, repairing signs, removing dumped garbage, but also could include invasive species removal, bucking trees that have come across a trail, that type of thing. Right now in Ontario, we have around 50 such property stewards. And I would say that we've probably always had property stewards as long as we've had properties in Ontario, caring neighbors who visit the lands and report back what they see and help us maintain them. But these 50 individuals are a bit more formal. They've all signed waivers and they have a set list of tasks and a reporting schedule. And for us in Ontario, this program is really a priority for growth. Our land portfolio is growing rapidly, as are the stewardship needs on these lands, particularly as we battle invasive species. So we know that we need to expand this program and engage more volunteers. But beyond just the stewardship work that our volunteers are helping us with, there is a huge community element to engaging these volunteers. They become ambassadors on our lands, talking to other visitors, and within our communities, they share kind of the word about NCC and responsible recreational use. So there is a large community element in engaging these wonderful volunteers and who really donate their time. So as wonderful as this program is, it's not without some challenges and a great deal of investment of NCC staff time. These volunteers are without doubt saving us trips, staff time and trips to these properties, and or they're kind of increasing the amount that we're able to survey and monitor our lands, which is just an enormous benefit and service to us. But it does require a fair amount of coordination from our stewardship staff, from our GIS staff, to make sure that they have the information that they need, that they are getting information back that we can actually use. It can be challenging. I would say that actually we're quite fortunate. We get approached by lots of people who are interested in volunteering. So recruiting volunteers is not really our challenge, but retaining long-term volunteers is more of an investment. Volunteers come to us with the best intentions, and then their lives change, and that's like completely reasonable. They might get a different job. They might have a change in their family or a change in their health. So oftentimes we feel we're aiming to have a property steward stay with us for at least a year. If they stay with us for a few years, that's a real gift. But of course, we understand if they move on. It does mean that we're kind of constantly recruiting and training new property stewards. Challenge for us is collecting their data and getting their data and the reports into our databases in a way that we can work with, as well as kind of ensuring that the quality of their data is consistent with what we need. Our volunteers don't typically have a background in field data collection, and therefore some may be comfortable just reporting, calling up our stewardship staff and just describing what they saw based on landmarks that are significant to them. Others may be comfortable drawing things on a map and emailing that. Others may just be able to collect coordinates that may or may not be correct or accurate, and same with species observations. So it does take a fair amount of investment from our stewardship staff and our GIS staff to kind of quality control and translate all of that monitoring data into a format that we can use. And that is the reason why we've been using the two tools that I'll be discussing today. The first is iNaturalist, and I can see that many of you have experience with Naturalist. And so, as you may already know, it is a community science species observation reporting platform. It's free to use, and we've been using it in a number of different ways that I'll get into today. And then I'll spend a shorter amount of time talking about Survey 123. Survey 123 is a product of ArcGIS, and we use ArcGIS Online for all of our data collection in the field that our staff do, and so we have been using it as well with our property stewards. You do need to have an account to use this, so this maybe won't be accessible for every group, but for those of you who use it, I wanted to show you what we're doing with it in case that's of interest. So I do have a little video that kind of shows how we set up our project, but I'll first just mention why we decided we wanted to set up a project for Ontario Region's properties in iNaturalist. One reason was that we had a number of staff on board who were really enthusiastic iNaturalist users. They were submitting observations whenever they were on NCC properties, but then also just out hiking on their own time. And they saw kind of all the ways that we could be using it at NCC. They not just making use of the observations that are collected by members of the public, but also engaging with other iNaturalist users. And then fortunately, when we went to set it up, we had a wonderful model to work off of, and that is Ontario Parks. They have a beautiful project in iNaturalist where they have an umbrella project, and I'll describe this in a moment, but they have an umbrella project for all of Ontario Parks, and then each park is a collection project. And that's exactly the model that we used here in Ontario Region. We created an umbrella project for Ontario Region, and that kind of allows us to compare statistics across different collection projects. So that's our Ontario Region project, which you can see here. And then we created collection projects for the properties that we decided to include. And I will play that video now so you can kind of see what this looks like. So to get to a project within iNaturalist, you would go to Community and Projects, and then you can search within Projects. And now I'm just scrolling down, and you can see all of our properties that I think about 30 properties that we included so far in our iNaturalist umbrella project. So each of these properties is a collection project. Here's the map. We're just zooming in. I'm just going to pause for a sec. You'll notice that wasn't all 85 plus. Oh, pardon me. All 85 plus of the properties that NCC owns in Ontario. We started with just around 30 back in 2019 when we piloted this project. We wanted to prioritize projects that properties that already seem to have significant iNaturalist use. So showing that there was a demand from the public to be naturalizing on these properties. We also selected properties that had easy public access, so trails, parking lots, visitor infrastructure. And since then, we've added more properties as we acquire new properties, and they do have reasonable visitor access. We do add them to iNaturalist. An example of that would be this property, Vital Bay Forests and Shoreline. This is a new acquisition for NCC in 2021. It's an enormous property in Manitoulin Island, and we uploaded the boundaries of this project. We made a place in iNaturalist and we're able to collect the data, these observations that were already submitted prior to us making this purchase and setting up the project. And we'll continue to be able to kind of round up those observations as more are added to iNaturalist. And I think, yeah, this is just zooming in on beautiful Vital Bay Forest and Shoreline. So my next video will go through a collection project for one of our properties. So this property is the North Bear Alvar, which is in Carden Alvar, just east of Orillia. And if you haven't had the opportunity to visit Carden Alvar, and particularly North Bear, I do encourage you to go. I think it's a spectacular place. And I just wanted to show you some of the features that are included in a traditional or collection project, really any project in iNaturalist. one thing I wanted to highlight, I guess, first was North Bear Alvar was a priority for us to set up early in iNaturalist, because an enthusiastic iNaturalist user had actually already created this project in iNaturalist. They had estimated essentially what the property boundaries were, created a place in iNaturalist, and then made that into a collection project because they were interested in essentially viewing a species list for this property that they were frequently visiting. And that was real motivation for us to move on the creation of this project, because we wanted the boundary to be correct. If we were going to be directing people to our property, we wanted to make sure that we weren't encouraging trespassing. And then B, we realized that we were kind of missing the opportunity to talk about NCC, to talk about this property, to just direct people to our website, and direct people to kind of more information about responsible visitation and use of the land. So, so this was really one of the kind of triggers for us to get moving on our iNaturalist project. So when you do set up a project in iNaturalist, the work is really upfront, and then after that, it's a pretty passive data collection situation. So to create North Bear Alvar, we would have created a place by uploading the boundary of the property as a KML file. And then we can add information in the about section or the description box. You have other opportunities to add information in the project journal. And then all of these other features that you can see here, these are just part of how iNaturalist sets up its projects. So it's collecting these observations. You can see this property already has over 900 observations from more than 500 species. It's a very biodiverse place. 49 observers. These are people who actually have been on the land and made these observations in the field. So they're visitors to the property collecting these observations. And this group of identifiers are iNaturalist users who have reviewed the observations that were made and confirmed or corrected those species IDs. So in many ways, these people are engaging with the project without having to actually visit it. So I'll just start this video so we can kind of take a tour of what this project looks like. You can see beautiful photos that people have uploaded, some species lists. We come down. Here's the property boundaries, and you can click on the links, see different species observations. I'm happy to report that actually most of these species observations fall along the trail. So that's always great news as a property manager. And yeah. And then another great element, as I mentioned, is you can see who's made these observations. And I'm going to scroll up here to the observer list, and you have the opportunity to see, who's making the most observations. You can see when they were there and know if you have kind of frequent visitors to your property. And this is a great volunteer recruitment tool. And in fact, this is how we met this gentleman, David, who we met him through iNaturalist. He was frequenting Carden Alvar properties, and we got in touch with him. And he is actually now a property steward for us in Carden. Next, I'm going to show you how you could query out observations. You'd go to the observation tab, use the search function, and you can filter it by species that are of interest to you. Here I'm doing threatened species, but another common search I would do would be invasive species. And then you can kind of generate these lists, check to see if there are any new species to the property that maybe you don't have in your records or new to you, and those may have management implications. They may change your stewardship planning. Two things that I wanted to highlight here is that first, if an observer comes across a sensitive species on your property, so a species that perhaps is at risk of poaching or destruction. So as an example, you could think of American ginseng or wood turtle. Those locations will be automatically obscured in iNaturalist. So they can collect that data in the field using iNaturalist, but it will not be visible to other users of iNaturalist. So I think it gets obscured on a 10-kilometer grid. And And so we won't be directing people to sensitive species on iNaturalist. If you want or need access to that information, which of course many conservation land managers will, you would need to get it through your regular kind of arrangement or agreement with the Natural Heritage Information Center. So that kind of protective measure is built into iNaturalist. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is you don't need to have cell phone service or use data to collect these points or these observations. iNaturalist, you could put your phone in airplane mode. iNaturalist will use your phone's GPS, and then when you're back home connected to the internet, you can sync it to iNaturalist or upload to iNaturalist at that point. Okay. So the collection projects that I showed you that are based on our properties, those are place-based projects, but iNaturalist also enables you to make projects that are not place-based. You could build a project around a certain species or an event. And NCC also every summer hosts a big backyard BioBlitz. This is not place-based. This is a project that just encourages people to get out and make observations wherever they are. It's really about engagement and education. And you can see this is a national event, and you can see this summer NCC engaged over 1,200 observers to make close to 37,000 observations. And BioBlitzes can also be place-based if you want. So say you make a new acquisition and you want to help build up your baseline inventory, you certainly can do a place-based BioBlitz. A kind of small scale example of that was this summer on our Maple Cross Coastline Reserve, which is a newish property to NCC in Prince Edward County. The local field naturalists conducted a month-long BioBlitz in June, and most of those participants collected their information and submitted via spreadsheet, as they kind of always have, but some participants did submit observations via iNaturalist. Oh, I'm sorry, we've skipped a slide. There we go. So I hope that I've been able to highlight some of the great features of iNaturalist and why it might be worth setting up a project. For us, it's valuable in helping us find new volunteers and supporters, people who are visiting our lands already and seem to be interested in making observations. It is a really handy way for our property stewards to collect species data for a bunch of reasons. One, it means that they're collecting GPS points that goes along with the observations. The species identification is being reviewed and confirmed by all of those identifiers on iNaturalist. We're able to query out species observations to help with their management planning and stewardship actions. And there are just a lot of ways, and probably more than I've written here, to engage with iNaturalist users. It's not without some challenges. I won't spend too much time on these, but these are things that we have kind of bumped up against while using iNaturalist. The first is when you're creating a place in iNaturalist and you're uploading those boundaries, there's a limit as to how many observations can be within that place. So if you're uploading a new boundary and that place has more than 100,000 observations, you can't do it. That's the kind of upper limit. So obviously for a single property, that's not close to being a problem. But say, for example, you wanted to upload the boundary of your Ottawa Valley natural area, that's a no-go. You'd have to break it into pieces, essentially, because there are more than 300,000 observations pictured here. Another issue just to keep in mind is to be familiar with the copyright and data sharing agreement that you have for your parcel layer. If your parcel fabric is owned by another group like TerraNet, for example, you may not be able to share single property parcels because you don't have the copyright to do so. So just keep that in mind. And then, as I mentioned, sensitive species location data is obscured. I think that this is a great protective measure, but it just means that if you need to work with that information, you'll need to work with NHIC to acquire it. And then I'll spend a little bit less time just mentioning how we're using some GIS tools for data collection with our property stewards. We use both Collector for ArcGIS and Survey 123 with our property stewards. These are both products of ArcGIS, and we do have to have an ArcGIS license. The main reason we're using these tools is that we already are using ArcGIS as an organization for our staff. Our staff are collecting data via Collector app on their phones and tablets in the field. So we were really motivated to have our property stewards collecting data using the same software and submitting it to ArcGIS Online using the same data forms so that basically it's all coming into us in the same place, in the same format, saving us a great deal of time. So I'll just kind of show you what that looks like. This is just kind of a generic Survey 123 form. Most of these are customized for our properties, but our property stewards would download the the Survey 123 app on their phone, and they would be given a survey link. So when they go on the property, they can open up the survey, and it just prompts them about all the kind of non-GIS data that we're hoping that they'll collect while they're out for the day. So when they got there, when they left, how long they were there, what they observed, and we have prompts on the types of issues that we're essentially hoping they'll keep an eye out for, like hunting infrastructure or vandalism. And as I said, these can be customized really however you want. It's just a form-based survey. But what makes it different, I guess, than other survey apps is that this data can be brought right into ArcGIS Online. And then also you can include links, as you can see here, to Collector. And I'll just show you what Collector looks like. So they would click that link, and then they would open up their Collector app, and that will take them to the map of the property where they can collect data. Collector is just a mobile GIS data collection app. So our GIS staff would create a map in ArcGIS, and it has forms for data collection. A typical property steward collector project would include either the aerial photo or the topography, as you can see here. This is actually a property steward map for Happy Valley Forest. So it's got the topography layer, it's got the property boundaries, the trails are indicated in green, and then you can upload other point signs and polygons or data layers that you think would be of value for your property stewards to see. In this map, all of the pink points and polygons are for invasive garlic mustard. So the property stewards can use this for navigation while they're in the field, but also for data collection. So for example, a property steward could be bopping along on the trail, come up to one of these garlic mustard points. They could open it up, they could see what the size was of this patch back in whatever year is recorded here, and they could add to those notes saying it's bigger or smaller or it's gone, hopefully. They can continue on, collect new points for invasive species or issues. Perhaps they find a fire pit, they would collect a new point for that. I should note that, I guess, like iNaturalist, they don't have to have cell service. They don't have to use data to use Collector. They can download the map before they head out in the field that day, use their phone's GPS, and then sync it when they get back home in the evening. And so the great advantage here is that they are collecting their data in the same format as all of our staff. It's going to ArcGIS Online in the same place that our staff's data is going to. So we know that the locations are accurate. They're filling in our forms that have the same prompts that we use for all of our other data collection. So in terms of data quality and kind of the format that it's coming to us, it's in great shape and is saving us a considerable amount of GIS and stewardship staff time to process it. Oh, one other thing to note is that we're using ArcGIS Collector right now and have for the last number of years, but this product is not going to be supported anymore, and it's moving towards field maps, which is pretty similar with some improvements. All right. So I guess the last point I wanted to end on is that these tools, iNaturalist, Collector, Survey 123, they're wonderful. They are saving us staff time in helping us collect cleaner, better data, but they don't replace the investment that we must have in the relationships with our volunteers. It's our stewardship staff, kind of reaching out to our volunteers, inspiring them about the ecological values of these properties, thanking them for their contributions, and involving them in conversations about the stewardship of the property and where it's headed. That helps us build and maintain these relationships, and that really kind of sees the return on the volunteer investment. So the staff time will always be an important investment into these relationships, no matter what tools we're using, but these are certainly helping us along. And with that, I'd be very happy to take some questions.
Thanks, Laura. That was a really great overview of NCC's use of these tools. I think it's really awesome to see how you're actually finding volunteers through people who are already engaged with your properties, who are already out, who are already using these things, and you're able to sort of bring them in and you know, use them at a higher level and make sure that all of their contributions are being recognized. So I think that's really cool. I think it's important for people to know that they shouldn't be intimidated by these apps. I know personally I was a little intimidated to try these out, thinking like, oh God, I need to already know what all of these things are in order to record these observations. But I think it's good for people to know that if you find something that you don't know what it is, that's another function of iNaturalist, that, you know, it is set up that you can tap into this huge network of experts who can help you ID things. I think, as, you know, professional biologists and ecologists, you know, we're amongst friends here. We can admit that we don't actually all know every single thing that we come across in the field. So rather than sending pictures to all my friends and colleagues going, hey, do you guys know what this is? There's this whole network out there. So have you found that, given that aspect of the technology, that it's sort of eliminated some of the barriers of volunteers who might not otherwise be able to be involved in this type of work?
Great question. I think that perhaps the greatest barrier that it would be eliminating is people who just kind of don't realize that that is of value to us. And so maybe they don't see themselves as a traditional volunteer. But if you are visiting our property monthly and you're collecting species observations, if we could be in touch and you could also just let us know if that gate was broken, that's like an enormous benefit. And I think that perhaps many volunteers don't kind of realize how much value that has to us. And so so yeah, I think we're engaging some different people than maybe we normally would. The people who email us out of the blue and say like, I want to plant trees. This is a different group, and we're so grateful for them.
For sure. And I think, I mean, NCC is a great example of, you guys have a huge land base and very limited staff. So volunteers are really an essential component of being able to get out on these lands and being able to monitor and track what's going on. Awesome. So we're starting to get some questions from the audience, so keep those coming, everybody. Here's a good question that I'm sure a lot of land managers are wondering about. Do you encounter any sort of liability issues with volunteers? Like, do they have to sign agreements to do work with you when they're doing these types of activities?
Yeah, great question. So we do have our property stewards sign a waiver. And I would say that the types of work that we ask them to do is typically kind of lower risk. So it would be more like trimming along a trail. We do have some volunteers who use power tools. Some of them are under agreement, a different type of agreement, and we are kind of looking at where they should fit, essentially, from a liability perspective. I think it's important to remember kind of what our general liability can and cannot cover, and that will be different for every organization. And also recognize that there is a value, an enormous value, to having volunteers conduct some of this work for us, and kind of balance that essentially. So for the most part, yes, they're signing waivers, they're doing low risk work, and we're kind of exploring some of the ways that we can move forward on some of the riskier work with really skilled volunteers. But I think that that's going to vary a lot from organization to organization.
Sure. Does NCC provide any training workshops for using iNaturalist, or does iNaturalist itself have any training workshops that people can find online?
Yes, iNaturalist does. They have wonderful resources. You can go to iNaturalist.ca, but you can also go to iNaturalist.org, and they have a wonderful, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting what it's called, but they have like a great discussion page. You can search questions, but there are great resources available directly on iNaturalist.
Awesome. Does each volunteer need to have their own ArcGIS account, or does NCC have an account that they're able to log into? How would that work?
Yeah, great question. So NCC does have an account, of course. We have created one property stewards account at this point, although we may be creating more in the future. We pay per account. And so multiple property stewards are using the same collector account. And that is another reason why we don't collect sensitive data species information in collector. We would ask our property stewards to collect species data through iNaturalist. We trust our property stewards, but the fewer people who have access to sensitive species information, the better.
Of course. Someone was asking, you mentioned that there's a maximum number of observations, the 10,000, 100,000. Is that annually? Is that total? How does that work?
It's actually at the time that you're uploading the boundary. So if you're creating a place in iNaturalist and you go to upload that boundary, and that boundary would already contain 100,000 observations. So those are observations that people have already made within that area. You can't do it. You need to make smaller ones, smaller places. And you could break, if you wanted to do like, I don't know, all of Ottawa River Valley or something, you could break it into sections and create those. I think essentially every time, I'm not that good at this type of thing, the computery thing, but I think probably every time you run a query, that's taking up a great deal of computing power on the iNaturalist servers. And so they put these limits in so that everybody's not creating their own project for like the world, and then that query is running, and it's just really taxing. And I'm sure buying new servers is probably pretty expensive. So I think that that's why it's there. But I imagine, as iNaturalist continues to grow in popularity, the size of these boundaries in some of these like high use areas are going to get smaller and smaller based on that limitation.
For sure. So have you guys been able to integrate some of the observations and the data that you're getting into NCC's management plans for your properties?
Yes, and not as much as we would like to, I
Right.
would say. So right now, all of this data is being collected through these projects. We have some stewardship staff who are really tuned into it. They have alerts set up. So every time a new certain type of observation, like invasive species, for example, comes up, they're going to get that email, come into their inbox and check it right away. Others who check it on kind of like an annual basis when they're reviewing their targets, and then some who maybe aren't using it yet at all. So it's kind of variable right now. We're in talks about how we would maybe kind of have some sort of annual or quarterly prompt to check your iNaturalist projects. But at this point, we're not like bringing all that iNaturalist data for our properties and putting it into our own geo databases, because it does live there, and that's working for us. It's more focusing on those invasives and those species at risk at this point.
For sure. I just saw someone mention in the chat that Seek is another really great tool, which is kind of tied into the iNaturalist network. But if anybody is sort of just wanting to get their feet wet and get out there and start learning how to sort of do this digital species ID, it's pretty fun.
It is really fun.
I've been using it lately.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we're all professionals, but we can all learn new things as well. Someone's asked, is it a complicated process to make your own forms in Survey 123? And you've already touched on the other part of their question about whether or not you can use sensitive data in that program, that it's better if you're doing that through the other platform.
Yeah, so nothing about collector, like our staff would collect sensitive species data in collector. There's nothing about collector that would inhibit you from collecting a sensitive species point. And I think probably if you have kind of a small group of trusted staff people and they're using like one single, they have their own account for each person or whatever, it's fine. You can, of course you can, that's, you know, we trust within our organization. So yes, it's set up to collect whatever data you want. But Survey 123 is really, it's just a form-based kind of like SurveyMonkey. It's very easy to set up surveys that look however you want. I guess one thing I would note is our GIS team informed me that there's a really similar open source free product called Kobo Toolbox, which was built for NGOs. It's worth checking out. I don't think it wouldn't connect to ArcGIS Online if that's you'll have to decide if that matters to you or not, but apparently it has really similar forms and surveys that you can build, and it was built for field work.
Awesome. Someone else has asked, do you have any recommendations for how students might begin to organize and share biodiversity changes over time? So they're saying that they're already using iNaturalist and eBird. Do you have any other thoughts or recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose like from an iNaturalist perspective, like collecting observations is very, like, it's fun to use, it's great, it's powerful. But I would look around in iNaturalist at the types of projects that are already out there. I've really been talking today about place-based projects, but I have no doubt that there are projects focusing on specific taxa that are really set out to collect that type of information about changes in biodiversity over time. So I would spend some time exploring in Collector, look for some of those taxa-based projects. I think that you could find some that do a great job at kind of communicating that change.
Sure, that's what, yeah, it's amazing the number of projects and things that are already set up in there, and you just need to explore a little and tap into some of those things. So you already mentioned that this was sort of based off the Ontario Parks model of having the umbrella for the overall project and then the different sites. Is NCC across Canada using this as well, or is Ontario sort of at the leading edge?
Yeah, great question. We are, I think nationally we have a relationship with iNaturalist, and we do the BioBlitz, and I know that different teams, the different regions at NCC are involved with the City Nature Challenge, which is a BioBlitz coordinated in iNaturalist. But we don't have like an NCC umbrella project yet at this point. I think that hopefully that's the direction things are headed. But at this point, Ontario is the only province that has this kind of set up at this point, but more to come.
Okay. All right. And I guess the last question would be sort of what do you see as the next steps for your program?
Yeah, great question. I think using the data more would be one.
Right.
Supporting our staff to make use of it, to access it, to query it more frequently and incorporate it more into their plans. I think also adding more properties. As I said, we started with just 30. Our motivation was to get our most accessed and properties up there, but I think adding more properties and doing more engagement through it. So updating those property descriptions when changes happen on our property, creating project journals, finding kind of more ways to communicate about these lands and these species through iNaturalist would be a priority.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Laura. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this today. We're going to let you go, and we're going to move on to our second speaker now.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone for the questions.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Our second speaker is Dan Levitick, and Dan is the biologist ecologist with the Essex Region Conservation Authority, or ERCA. He's been providing local expertise on the Essex region's natural heritage for the past 31 years. His main responsibilities have included habitat restoration, enhancement, and management initiatives on Conservation Authority properties, review of environmental impact assessments, biological input into municipal plan review, and authoring various biological inventories, management plans, and natural heritage strategies for the Essex region. Dan has also provided technical input into various species at risk recovery plans, strategies, and assessments, as well as through his involvement with the Board of Directors for Tallgrass Ontario, the Southern Ontario Ecological Land Classification Technical Committee, and the Conservation Authority's Planning Ecologist Working Group. His education includes a Master of Science in Graduate Research in Botany, specializing in plant systematics, plant ecology, soil and vegetation analysis from the University of Alberta, and a Bachelor of Science degree specializing in population and environmental biology with a minor in geology from the University of Windsor. Dan will be speaking to us today about the Southern Floral Inventory Analysis Spreadsheet, also known as SOFIA, which he has created. SOFIA is a macro-enabled Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, which allows users to import floral inventory data, then tabulate and summarize the results in table and chart format for easy use in reports and presentations. Dan's going to be giving us a live demonstration on how to use SOFIA. He'll explain some of the functions and we'll discuss how the tool has been developed and implemented. So welcome, Dan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and hopefully you can see my screen now. This is an extreme pleasure to actually be here today as part of the Latornell Conservation Symposium series and the webinar series on ecological monitoring tools. We're giving a presentation as well as doing a live demonstration of how to utilize SOFIA, which is the Southern Ontario Floral Inventory Analysis. So what is actually SOFIA? Essentially, it's just a macro-enabled Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. And it allows you to tabulate and import and summarize and analyze and automate your floral inventories, botanical inventories of natural areas or features within Southern Ontario. Hopefully, at the end of this, you'll realize, which many people probably don't realize, is that Microsoft Excel does a lot more than balance your checkbook. Properly programmed, you can actually do a bunch of remarkable things with it. It is a very robust piece of software. The actual spreadsheet is available through our download link at our static link through our Google Drive. That is always going to be there. And if we ever update SOFIA, you can always get the latest version by clicking that link. We also have what's called a SOFIA primer document, or it's a PDF that you can share amongst other people, which also contains the link to the download. It's a very small PDF file. Perhaps we can post that as part of the summary of this particular webinar when we're finished and posting this presentation. So really, the features of SOFIA, it allows you to compile floral inventories live in the field. Hey, if you have a tablet or a smartphone capable of running Excel, you can utilize that in the field and just go along and do your floral inventory. You can also use it in the office, of course, on your PC or your laptop. And you can do it just from field notes. Like me, I'm old school. I'll bring in some old field notes that I've handwritten, and in the field, I'll just fill in SOFIA and I'm on my way. And it also allows you to import previous inventories that have been done in the past. And this is a feature we've just recently incorporated into it, which is extremely valuable in order to get old inventory data into a database so that you can see perhaps changes over time. And one of the things is that if you're importing an old inventory, a lot of times it has used old taxonomy. SOFIA is basically has the capability of updating this to the current taxonomy utilized by the NHIC. So once this, you do your inventory, it tabulates it for you, and it creates a nice table which you can copy and paste into Microsoft Word or any other word processor. You can filter the data on various attributes that we've included for each of the plant species that is in the list. And you can summarize and analyze your data, including conducting what's called a floristic quality assessment. And it looks at the coefficient of conservatism of each of the species, and it does an FQA analysis. We've also incorporated this special feature here just recently, and once you have all of your inventory in SOFIA, you can actually export that inventory to a CSV file in case you happen to have a database and you want to import it into that particular database. CSV is a very easy way to import data. So essentially, again, it's utilized for floral inventories of large natural areas or small polygons within natural areas, for example, as well. It streamlines your data collection, reporting, and monitoring, especially if you do successive SOFIAs over periods of time. You can also utilize SOFIA if you do a full inventory as part of an Ontario wetland evaluation system. And this is the evaluation system that the province certifies people in order to go out and identify and score potentially provincially significant wetlands. It allows you to do the floral inventory part of that and filter and summarize the rare species component, which gives a score in the OSE evaluation for that evaluation. It also is very valuable for conducting environmental impact assessments, and our Conservation Authority has some guidelines, and we are requiring consultants who do environmental impact assessments to submit a SOFIA because it contains so much data and analysis on the floristics of the feature that's being analyzed as part of a development proposal that it's just so valuable to everyone. It also helps if you're potentially wanting to undertake perhaps some climate change adaptation strategies for an area, because we've incorporated some data that was recently done in 2018 publication that looks at identifying across the province some potentially vulnerable species to climate change. And for the plant species, we've incorporated that into SOFIA, so it will identify those species that might be in your natural feature. And it does a whole bunch more, and I will hopefully show you a whole bunch of things that that you'll be very, very interested in using SOFIA for. One of the things we wanted to point out is that SOFIA is a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet simply, and it has some very robust programming in it. I've had some help from staff within our office, Sydney Clackett and Brian Schmidt of our office helping with some programming. Some other consultants have also helped with some suggestions on programming, and it is open source. Everyone can see the beautiful programming that's in there. Once you look at it, it's extremely elaborate. And even if you're not interested in doing a floral inventory, just taking a look at a very robust Microsoft Excel spreadsheet that's capable of doing a whole bunch of things, you can take the programming and perhaps utilize it in another spreadsheet you might be developing yourself, just looking at the coding. It can be used by all sorts of conservation agencies and organizations, from conservation authorities to government organizations and NGOs, ecological consultants, naturalists, academia, anybody who wants to do a floral inventory and do some analysis of that inventory or just tabulate or look up species. It's a great tool. I've included this in my presentation too, so this part of the presentation will also be posted as part of the summary of the webinar, so you have a contact information in case you run across any particular questions while you're using SOFIA. I'd be happy to troubleshoot them for you. I'm very responsive, so that when people are utilizing it, I want to get back to you as soon as possible so you can work through any problems that you might have utilizing the spreadsheet. So what I'm going to do now is try and give a live demonstration of SOFIA. What I do want to point out is that SOFIA does incorporate the NHIC plant list, and that's from the Natural Heritage Information Center in Peterborough. You can get that particular species list at any time by going to this particular webpage, and going down near the bottom, you will see species lists. And there is a zip file which does contain a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet from the NHIC, which contains all species within Ontario, including the vascular plant list, which is the one which is incorporated into SOFIA. And that's what we're utilizing as the base list. So what I'm going to do is take you through and show you exactly what happens when you open up SOFIA. We're just opening up that particular file just now, just to show you what happens when you open up a regular SOFIA file. Because when you do open it for the first time, you will see a security warning at the top, and you'd want to make sure that you enable that content because it is enabling the actual sophisticated programming and macros that are built into SOFIA. So once you've enabled that, you can see that on the first page, we have just some basic instructions and a summary of how to use SOFIA and how to search for species and things like that. This should get you well on your way in order to utilize it, but I did want to go through a bunch of other things just to show you the structure on what's built into it. The first or the second worksheet here is called the survey info, and we're going to be filling this in a little bit later on, but this contains all the information on who you are, what feature you're analyzing, and the survey date. I want to go back down here too to the NHIC list. This is simply that downloaded list we got from the province from that website, extracted it from the zip file, copy and pasted it right here in its entirety as it is. I want to point out as well that this particular list we're using right now in this version of SOFIA is from 2020. There was a recent update to this list in 2021 that I am trying to work on incorporating into SOFIA, but it's not a simple exercise because there are some changes to the NHIC list this year that are not simple. They're complicated, and I need to incorporate all of that complication into SOFIA to make it work for the most recent list. But it doesn't appear to be any really significant changes to the list from 2020, just some other minor changes. Also, there's another list that is incorporated into SOFIA, and this is a list from a publication in 2017 done by Mike Oldham, which is the vascular plants of Carolinian Canada. And this gives you the rarity rankings of the various species in Ontario for all of these particular counties within Southern Ontario. So this is a resource that does regional rarity ranking. I want to also point out that everything here has got a lot of background material in case you have any questions about any of the nomenclature or the short forms being used, the acronyms and things like that. There's a glossary that pulls together all the different things that are utilized in here, including right at the very bottom, if you wanted to be interested in here. This is from the Carolinian vascular plant list showing you the distribution of the various communities that that rarity ranking applies to. And I also want to point out too, under the notes and references section, that everything that's utilized in here is fully referenced. So in case you are wondering where to get a copy of that Carolinian plant list, it's right here. What is that document that I referred to talking about perhaps climate change vulnerability indices? It's right here. The floristic quality assessment, if you want to know what is that thing and what does it mean and how can you use it in analyzing a natural feature, they're all here. So it shows you that there's a lot of background information that was put in here, and it points you to those resources in case you have some further questions. So what I want to do is actually give you an idea of how to utilize this. And essentially, the species list worksheet is the workhorse. It basically pulls together and aggregates all of the various data sets, the NHIC list and the Carolinian list, plus some other attributes we've built into it. And it pulls together all of these. This is the sheet that you would have up in the field of SOFIA if you're working on a tablet. And essentially all you're really doing is filling in column C. You can type a Y, or you can actually double click either in the field or on a tablet, and it just fills it in and say, yes, that's present, and on your way. Once you have that column filled in, it's a matter of just pushing a few buttons and your analysis and your tabulation is all complete. That's how simple it is to use. And it's utilizing this NHIC list. Now, within this list, we've also, as I said, aggregated and incorporated a lot of information. You can see from the NHIC list, it is pulling together a number of different attributes here, which is the coefficient of conservatism utilized in the floristic quality assessment, the coefficient of wetness, and also the various rarity rankings, global rankings, provincial endangered species ranking, or provincial rarity rankings, etc. The next couple of columns actually shows you that this comes from the Carolinian plant list and shows you the various regional rankings of those particular species. Since that came out in 2017, I don't believe that the NHIC is planning on updating this. So if you live in a particular county here and you have more information on the rarity ranks of those various species, please feel free to edit those codes within the Carolinian list to update them to be more accurate. We've also incorporated some other attributes of those species, the type of species, whether it be a tree, a forb, a shrub, a grass, etc. And that's quite valuable. Flowering season, I've incorporated as much as I can from various resources. However, this certainly is open source, and if anybody wants to provide some additional information that I can incorporate in it, that would be great. I'd like to see everybody contribute where there's some missing data. It's certainly not complete and 100% perfect, so it needs some working on, as well as introducing some additional missing data. Whether or not that is that particular plant species is an invasive exotic species or not, okay? We have the ability also to override some of the coefficient of wetness or coefficient of conservatism values within the NHIC list. If you don't want to override them at all because you just feel free that the NHIC has provided you with adequate information, that's fine. I've looked at it and I've analyzed it from a number of different perspectives, utilizing some resources from the United States. And some of those I feel is warranted of overriding the value that NHIC is giving us just based upon what I'm seeing and averaging out the opinions from those experts in the United States as well on a more accurate coefficient of wetness for a particular species. If you wish to get rid of those overrides, please feel free to do so. Just cancel out this column, just take out the word override, and it's just NHIC. The other attributes at the very end here is the Climate Change Vulnerability Index produced by Brinker et al. In 2018. And those species that are identified as vulnerable to climate change and whether or not they're very confident in that particular assessment are provided here. And that's great. If you come across an inventory, you can see if you do have some vulnerable species to climate change, and therefore you want to try and concentrate on doing an adaptation strategy, perhaps, for them. And the last column, based upon a number of different resources, are species that may be found in tallgrass prairies. Now, they're not exactly tallgrass indicators, but they can be found in tallgrass prairies. So if you do have a lot of them, especially ones that are very rare, you can identify that, yes, I think that natural feature does contain a remnant prairie, okay? So really that is the way we enter in and actually see all of the data. This is how we aggregate all the data into one spreadsheet. And as I said, in the field, just by double clicking on the attribute here, entering a Y value will itemize it and just check it off and say, yes, that is present. What I'd like to do is actually show you another way to enter in data. And this is if you have a previous inventory from a report, for example. And in my case, what I'm going to be doing is I'm utilizing a report that was done in 2011 for the town of Tecumseh. This is a town that's just east of the city of Windsor. And we did a natural heritage inventory of all of their remnant natural features. And in 2011, we came across a particular site here that I'm going to use as an example. The report format in itself, that I pulled from our files, was a PDF format. And in order to try and efficiently get the tabulation of data into SOFIA, we do have to convert that to a different format. And the most efficient way is to convert it to a Microsoft Word document. Now, I want to give a shout out back over here to a website. It's called Zamzar, ZAMZAR.com. And this is a wonderful site that I've used repeatedly in order to take one file format and convert it into another very efficiently, very fast. And it does not just word processing documents, but it does all sorts of different documents to convert from one format to the other. So we uploaded the PDF and basically retrieved the Microsoft Word document, and we were working in this particular document as far as the floral inventory to try and get that into SOFIA. And so as you can see, this document had report sections on this inventory, giving you the location and general description and the criteria fulfilled for that. But down here under item 7 is where we had the floral inventory data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to this SOFIA spreadsheet, and we're going to start at the very beginning utilizing this particular report, and we're going to enter in the contact information. This is the person who's responsible for the data being entered in here with their contact information, and if anybody has any questions. The natural feature ID, in this case, this feature is called Fairplay Woods within the town of Tecumseh, and it has all the coordinates and mapping links and things like that. It comes from a particular publication, which is called the Town of Tecumseh Natural Heritage Feature Inventory. And we're only going to be entering in that particular inventory that was done at one date by Jerry Waldron and Peggy Hurst. Although there are other columns for different surveys, the current version of SOFIA in doing some of the things is only going to, you can enter these in, but for some specific functions, such as exporting to a CSV, it's only going to do it on the first survey date. So if you want to do successive survey dates to see changes over time, you need to enter them in as separate SOFIA files. And that way you can see that differences in the data sets, okay? And once you've done that and entered in that basic information, what you can actually do is click the orange button and it takes your template SOFIA file. It takes the information from the natural feature ID and the natural feature number, and it creates a file name automatically for you. That's your feature or that's your file name that you're working on correctly right now, okay? So now we have that saved as a different thing. And what we're actually doing is going to come over to the converter tab, and we're going to start taking the information from the Microsoft Word spreadsheet. I'm going to take the inventory over here and go through the page by page, because we can't go across pages, you start losing information. And you basically just highlight it with your mouse and go copy and come back over to SOFIA and go right click paste, matching the destination format. And it's going to paste those species into the list. Now, what's cool about this is that what it's actually doing is also checking the taxonomy at the same time. And you can see under column C that there is a new scientific name for some of these old citations. And what it's actually doing is it's going over to the synonyms worksheet. It's looking under column C and saying, do I have one of these old citations of that name? And if so, I want to start using this now, okay? This in itself is extremely valuable. If anything, and you wanted to use SOFIA for something, and you want to know what's the new name of, Aster lateriflorus. And anybody who is a botanist knows that Aster was taken apart and separated from the Aster genus into many other different genera. And that's what it is now. Okay, that's great. So this tool in itself, just the converters worksheet, is remarkable in case you can't remember what the new name of something is. Okay. So what I'm going to do is go through, and I'm not going to copy and paste this all over because I'm going to save some time. What I'm going to do is come over to, this should be spreadsheet number 2. And I zoomed in a little bit so you can actually see what I'm doing as well. And you can see that I've copied and pasted the spreadsheet, or copy and pasted the tables over the list. And you can see that there are some unresolved species that I didn't find in the synonyms column. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that in many cases, that old citation of Cornus amomum, they should have been referring to a subspecies rather than just Cornus amomum. So in this case, every time that is Cornus amomum, it should have been something else, Cornus obliqua subspecies amomum, for example. Here's another example of an error that we do have to manually correct. And this is an artifact of actually taking your PDF and uploading it to Zamzar and converting it to Word. It's not Zamzar's fault. It's sometimes there's artifacts introduced from converting from a PDF format to word processing, is that the character recognition gets a little bit messed up. This is supposed to be Learsia virginica, and for some reason it took the LE and changed it into a P in the conversion. So very simply, you're wanting to go through this particular list and make sure that everything is correct. And once you correct that particular name, you can see that error bar disappeared. Here's another one, Bruce radicans. This needs a subspecies. So there are a couple of subspecies that might be at your site. Most commonly, it's probably subspecies Nagundo, for example, which is now known as Toxicodendron radicans, variety radicans. Okay, so here we go. Oh, that's the way it used to be called. Now here's a new name. And there's some other things too. What I'm going to do is show you a little tool that once you have all of your species copied and pasted here, and you see these error bars coming up, you can press this particular button here called correct names. And for the most commonly utilized names from old taxonomy that need correction, they are programmed here for you. And sometimes it might be a spelling mistake. Sometimes it might be that they've missed the variety, which they should have included at the very beginning when they did that inventory. And down here, example, here's another one. Here's a spelling mistake from xanthoxylum. It's not E, it's actually U. Okay, so you can program this at your will in order to correct some mistakes in some inventories in the past. And by pressing that particular button, it will attempt to correct those in the list. And we're looking and we're seeing, are there any more errors here? Any more? Oh, no, we don't. Okay, so it's taken a lot of those, taken all those errors, and it's finally corrected them. Now, the next step in this process is once you have that in here, and this is for anything, even if you're doing within your species list, a manual checking of the Ys within the column, the converter is taking your list, and what it's actually going to do is you come over here to the import worksheet, and you're going to import all of those species from that particular list by pressing on this button, and it's going to copy and paste them here. And what it's actually doing, and this is key, is that it's taking the name and it's correlating it to the species element ID number. This is the serial number of the species. No matter if the species name changes, the taxonomy changes, this should not change. It should stay the same. So this is what we're referencing. Okay. So we've gone over here. We've entered in under the converter. We've checked that it's clean. That's good. We've come over here and now we're ready to import from the converter. When we do this, it's going to copy them over and it is going to populate automatically this particular column with a Y for every species that's in here. Once it's done that, once you have this, this is key, that all of the species on the site are accounted for by having a Y present in the column C. The next step, and really the last step of this, is to press this button over on the right-hand side, and it's going to generate this table. This is the tabulation of your data, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to and save some time. I've pressed the button that says import from the converter. You can see that it has pasted all the element ID numbers here. It has over here populated column C with a Y, and it has generated the inventory for that particular site. And this is where you get into a whole bunch of analyses of the site that really shine, or actually, it really causes you to look at the programming in here and saying, boy, there's a lot you can analyze and there's a lot of questions you can answer about that particular inventory. Okay. So in order to just to save some time in that, if we take this particular set of columns, since we're dealing with a feature within the Essex region, we're only concerned with column K, you can just highlight the other columns and just hide those. So you're not within your jurisdiction. Just get rid of those because you're only concentrating on your own. And you can also, I'll just increase the magnification of it so we can all see. What this is actually doing now for you is really giving you an analysis. I'm going to go over to the next one, which is this one here. This is the table, so the tabulation of your data. So what is it saying? Okay, some of the more key features are there any provincially threatened or endangered species at risk? Yes, there are. So you're filtering on the 0 column. There they are. So if you wanted to actually include a chart within your Microsoft Word document, you can just highlight, the fields here, copy and paste into it, saying these are present on our site are endangered and threatened species. Okay. Another attribute you could filter on are, do we have an invasive species on our site? Yes, we do. We have these invasive species. Okay, we want to undertake some woody control of those. We're going to send in a crew. We're going to go after the woody ones because we can cut them out and perhaps apply some herbicide. So we're going to come in here to the type, and we're going to highlight tree, shrub, and woody vine. And these are the species we want to identify for that particular action. Okay. This is the power of spreadsheets and filtering that just amazes me, that once you have this programmed, you can answer any question you like. Coefficient of, or the climate change vulnerability index. Do we have any? Yes, we have a few, some low vulnerable and some moderately vulnerable. So we do have some moderately vulnerable species to climate change. So we might want to undertake a climate change adaptation strategy for these particular species. They happen to be trees. So perhaps expanding their plantings outwards, so increasing the population so they have some resilience to climate change impacts and the population is more robust. This allows you to do that with that particular inventory. And then once again, the other attribute down here is the tall grass indicators. Do we have any? This is a particular swamp forest. So although we do have some other species here that may be associated with tall grass prairie, they appear in the inventory. This is not specifically a tall grass vegetation community type. So, but if you were in a prairie, this would give you the prairie species that are there, okay, within that particular site, perhaps within that ELC polygon. So that's kind of what it's showing you as far as the tabulation of the inventory data so that you can sort and filter and answer some questions. What are some of the other things that it provides for you? Well, if you were to have your own database, as I said, all you have to do is click this orange button over here. It will create a CSV file in the same folder as the SOFIA file in CSV format, extracting the basic information, especially the species element ID number and the name, along with some information that you'd want to know, who collected it, what was the date of the collection, what was the natural feature identification, etc. And then you can import that into your own database very efficiently. And it does generate that CSV export over here in the CSV export worksheet tab. So it copies and pastes that over, and this is what is exported into a new file on your system. It summarizes your rarity for you so that it aggregates it. Do I have any globally rare species? Yes, I do. One. Okay, we have some national ones, some species at risk, provincially rare species. There's one, and it's a common question. How many provincially rare species do I have at my site? You come back to your inventory, you go under the S rank field, and you want to select everything that might be S1 to S3, and these are the species that are provincially rare. That's the power of this. You don't know more coordinating and matching things up. This is so robust and so efficient to use in answering any question. So the rarity gives you your statistics. It also takes all of those rare species, or those species that are tracked by the NHIC, that they would like you to submit to them. This is their format for submission, this particular worksheet, and that it extracts those ones they're interested in and populates this for you. Now, you do have to fill in some extra information, such as the observation date of that particular population, the other details regarding especially the GPS coordinates of that particular population they're interested in. That'll be across the site. And then a number of other different questions. A lot of these are designed for faunal inventory submissions. For floral inventory submissions, it's a little bit simpler to fill this in, but this is the key in that it extracts those that the NHIC are interested in accepting those observations in their format, and then you can send this away when this is completed. The floristic analysis. We come here and we can see that this particular site had 180 species, 154 of them, or 85.5% were native, 14% were introduced. We have the floristic quality assessment indicating here that it's above 50. And you can read those background documents to explain how they got to that and why that's useful in analyzing the flora. And this means that this particular site is extremely rare. The flora is extremely rare and represents a significant component of Ontario's biodiversity. It's a good site, very high quality floristics on this particular site. It also averages across the site the mean coefficient of wetness. Now, this doesn't necessarily indicate that all of it is a wetland, but it indicates that yes, you have a slight predominance of wetland species. If you're in a true wetland, it's going to show you that yes, you've got a lot of wetland species, or vice versa. If you're in upland, it'll show you that as well. And these can be copied and pasted into a Microsoft Word document as well for just illustrative purposes, even a pie chart showing you the proportion of native versus introduced. Physiognomy, which just shows you the proportion of trees, shrubs, woody vines, forbs, ferns, etc., in various ways, and whether they're native, introduced, etc. Just extensive amounts of just analysis you can do once you have the data in there. So that's for one particular site, and I just wanted to go over one other example very quickly. In that, we want to say, for example, generate a list of our regional flora, everything that occurs, say, within the Essex region, or everything that's in the Chatham-Kent or Langton. So in order to do that, and I'm just going to show you how you would do that very quickly, I have to go back to here and clear all of my lists so that everything is all everything's all errored out and there's nothing there anymore. Converter should clear this list. So the clearing button just kind of erases everything. So we're going to come back into the species list. Let's say we want to generate something for the Essex region. You're going to highlight the particular county that you're in, and you're going to, let's just take Elgin County, for example, and you're going to filter on that county, and you're going to select for everything except for blank. Okay, and then all you're going to do is put a Y in everything that's here. You can just put one Y in there and just drag this down and fill in the entire column C. Okay, so for the sake of time, what I'm going to do is go to the one that I've generated for the Essex region. I'm going to get rid of all of these other counties here. And you can see this is our full floral list for the Essex region. Everything that basically I filtered on, populated column C, press the button, show me my inventory. There's your inventory. That's everything within the Essex region. So then you can say, for my jurisdiction, where are all my, what are all my species at risk? There they are. How many of them do I have? Go over to the rarity thing. I have within the Essex region 292 provincially rare species and 37 species at risk, okay, in my floral species. And the rest of it is really not that important as far as the floristics, but this allows you to do some specific things for your particular region. A lot of times as a biologist working for a conservation court, I get a lot of questions from people. One of the questions is, hey, I own a piece of land, I farm this piece of property, it's very, very wet, I'm thinking of not farming it anymore, I want to restore it to something, I'm thinking of a nice swamp forest, what species can you recommend? Oh, good question. Okay, within our region, we want to plant native species, for example, so we want to make sure that we just pick those that are just native, and that we're going to get to that in just a minute. But let's go into the wet species. The wet species coefficient of wetness -3. Let's go down to -2, for example. Okay, we're going to do a wetter type of thing. We're going to do a swamp. So we're going to do trees, shrubs. Yeah, tree or shrub swamp. Okay, great. And we're going to take the S ranks, because the S ranks give you an indication on whether or not it is native or exotic introduced. And we're only going to select ones that are native, for example. And we're going to not select those that have an E in them or have not been actually identified. And there we go. So this is the list of trees and shrubs that are wet loving, that are native, that could be selected for a restoration. We might not want to have those that are threatened or endangered. That might be very difficult to get a hold of, but this allows you to do that type of analysis and answer a whole bunch of different questions. What are my invasive species that I am within the Essex region? There they are. What are the species in the Essex region that I want to do a climate change adaptation strategy for? Those that are highly vulnerable or moderately vulnerable within the Essex region. Perhaps ones that are just trees, because I can do a lot of tree planting to do adaptation strategy. They're the ones that I want to concentrate on. So once you have this floristically, you can answer all sorts of different questions and do a lot of different types of analyses. So I'm going to leave it at that and just say, there's the demonstration of how to use this particular spreadsheet. I hope that everyone gets a chance to download it and try it out themselves, even for the simplest of inventories, and just see how useful this might be in your particular field of work. And as I was listening to the previous presentation, I thought to myself, is there a way to get iNaturalist floral lists incorporated very efficiently into SOFIA for a project? So therefore you have the observations that everyone has done. SOFIA has taken all of those, populated it, and said, here's an analysis of that particular project from a floristics point of view. So thank you very much. And I'm going to stop sharing now, and we can answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks so much, Dan. That's awesome. I know when I first suggested to the Latornell Steering Committee that we do a presentation on a cool Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, everybody thought I was a bit off. But the fact that we have so many people here today, we're still sitting and listening, I think it really demonstrates that we do have a need for these types of things. And, you know, I just think it's amazing. And for anybody whose head is spinning right now, don't worry. You know, we are recording this presentation. You will be able to watch it again and see Dan going through all these various steps. But, you know, between the primer that Dan has prepared that's available along with the spreadsheet, it's really helpful. And I recommend just sort of downloading it and trying to dive into it because it is quite intuitive once you start playing around with it. And, you know, Dan has provided everybody with his contact information. So if you do have sort of technical questions about it or very specific questions of, you know, I'm trying to do this and it's not working, Dan's already said that he's happy to have those discussions. So I'm sure everybody online appreciates that. And yeah, definitely seen some comments in the chat box about people being excited to try it, a little bit of head spinning. So we're all on the same page there. Dan, we have had some questions coming in from the audience, so I'll put some of those forward to you right now. And again, like I think a lot of people will want to follow up with you after the fact. You already touched on the one of, you know, is there a way to import data from something like iNaturalist? So awesome that that is sort of a next step idea of how you can move forward with this. I know that you've been able to integrate the use of this as a submission guideline for environmental impact assessments in your region. Can you talk a little bit about sort of any consultation that you did with your municipalities or with consultants in the area as you were developing this tool and what sort of uptake you've had from them?
Yes, I got a lot of good feedback from consultants, specifically the consultants that were working on a very large infrastructure project, the Right Honorable Herb Gray Parkway project. It was a massive highway and they had to do some species at risk restoration, transplantation, etc., and monitor those particular restoration sites over time to demonstrate to the ministry that, yes, they were successful in providing benefit and rescuing these species and basically creating a new species at risk habitat area. So what they did is they utilized a previous version of SOFIA and utilized the floristic quality assessment part of it in that they would have, say, for one particular site, 10 quadrats that would go in and they would inventory each one of those quadrats, and they may be 1 meter by 1 meter squares, for example, randomly placed. It would come out and give them a list of all of the different species found in all of those quadrats. And then it would summarize floristically what that site had as an FQA value. And they utilized that over time to say that, look, originally at the very beginning, we had a lot of weedy species, as anybody who's dealing with restoration knows that when you try and restore something, especially an open prairie type, you're going to get a bunch of weeds first. But over time, those weeds will die out and then the perennials will come back and dominate and your floristic quality index will go up. So this allows you over time, every time you go in there and you survey and do the floristic quality assessment, compare it to the previous one, you can see that the value goes up. This automates that almost just by popping in the list, bang, press a button, there's your number. It just streamlines all of that data. So the consultants themselves are very, very impressed with what this can do for them, especially those even that work in environmental impact assessments. To go out in the field and just even take this on a tablet and just click, 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 yes, 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 and that's it. You're done. You come back to the office and you start copying and pasting into your EIA all the results. It allows you to analyze it, basically saying which species are rare, which ones do I have to mitigate the impacts on, etc. So from the consulting realm, they were very pleased to have this. Even some consultants said, why aren't you selling this? Because this is so valuable. And I said, I never would want to do that. I would want everybody to utilize this as a tool to make their work better and more efficient. That is the key. And that's why I came up with this, is because it came from an inventory we did for a sub-watershed study in the town of Amherstburg. We had to inventory over 50 sites within one field season by a team of field staff. And everybody came back with a list of species. How do I aggregate this and make this report efficient to do? Everyone fills out the SOFIA, the spreadsheet, just fills it in, and then I can just copy and paste into the various report. So I had to do that out of necessity because I was doing inventories over and over again. And I said, there's got to be a better way. This is it. This is the better way. This makes it so much efficient.
Absolutely. And I mean, I truly appreciate it because I know you and I share similar consultants across our two conservation authorities. So I've already had the discussions with some of them of, hey, if you're using it for Dan, I'm glad to accept things in this format as well. So
yes, and consultants have taken it upon themselves as well to perhaps even modify it slightly for their own purposes. I love that because at least you've delved into the programming and you've taken a look at how it works. You understand how it works. Because it's open source, I want that because unfortunately, I've only got 2 years left in my career and I'm going to retire. And I don't want this just to die because no one has taken it on. If there's a community of practice of people who want to actually utilize this and share updates to this, that would be fantastic to keep it going in perpetuity.
For sure. And I know we've had the discussion before that you're shopping around for a home for someone to maintain it once you go off the road to retirement. But as far as having the most up-to-date version of the spreadsheet, do people have to go to the website and re-download it every time that they want to start a new inventory, or what's sort of the best plan for that?
We only update the spreadsheet when necessary, when a new NHIC list comes out, and there is one that came out this year. I'm struggling a little bit because they changed a bunch of stuff from the list from the previous versions. So that may not come out for a little while, but it is using the 2020 version. They just have to check just to see what version they're using. It'll always be that link that will contain the most recent version of the spreadsheet.
Awesome. We've had a few people asking if you can, is there a way to incorporate sort of abundance of species within the spreadsheet when they're doing inventories?
I thought about that as well. And for the NHIC submission worksheet, which they would like to know what the population size is, there is a field that you could fill that in there, but that only is for the tracked species that they're interested in getting information on, not for every species within the spreadsheet. So you could, after the fact, take your inventory and just kind of make a new column and just fill in some population abundance. I'm not sure what you'd be using that information for, other than just for information for your own knowledge about how big the population was that you found. So that simply you could, after the fact, just fill that in the inventory tab itself.
Right. I know you mentioned that some of the consultants have been modifying the spreadsheet a bit for their own use. Have you had anybody who has used it for wildlife surveys rather than botanical? No,
that suggestion has come up. I could take a lot of the other stuff dealing with floristics out of there and just repopulate a spreadsheet very similar to this with the wildlife list in the Ontario list, and just generate the tables, for example. I haven't got to that point yet. I might not. If somebody wishes
You've still
to take
got
that
2
on,
years, Dan.
that would
Come
be
on.
absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I don't. Well, there's other people who might be interested as well in that.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. We've had someone asking about sort of the geographical range of the use of this. I know you've got all the Carolinian data in there, but as far as the species list, you're using it for all of Ontario, correct? So anybody in Ontario can use this.
That's correct. It's the full Ontario list, although you can do some regional paring down from that Carolinian list to see just for your particular jurisdiction.
Awesome. Just looking through our list of questions to see if there's anything else. How easy would it be to incorporate other sort of regional or conservation authority species status ranks? Can they just sort of create a new tab and put those types of details in there?
What I would do is try and utilize the one that's in the Carolinian list, the Carolinian tab that was produced by Mike Oldham in 2017.
Right.
That gives you kind of that jurisdiction. If you wish to replace one of those things, let's just say you're a conservation authority and you go across several jurisdictions, you could take one of those columns and just replace it with your own. Right. And just fill in the values all the way down that Carolinian list. And that would be a modified Carolinian list for your own. And that way you wouldn't have to mess with any programming trying to figure out, okay, I'm incorporating a new column. So now I got to try and grab that and figure out where it fits in. If you just replace one of those columns with your own data, that would be the most efficient way to do that.
Awesome. And someone was asking, is there a way to georeference the information, or is there a way of linking it to GIS data?
In the very first tab, the survey information field, you are indicating for your natural feature, your geo coordinates. And so you are giving the location information for the larger natural feature, not necessarily for each individual population of species of risk, for example. Although that information is in the NHIC submission worksheet, where for each population of tracked species, they want the geo-referenced coordinates. Once that's in there, I think that there is a possibility of trying to incorporate that into GIS software to pull that information somehow. Perhaps the CSV file itself can be utilized as an interim in order to try and get GIS to pinpoint exactly where that coordinate is, and then you can link it to the SOFIA file on your system so that when you click on your natural features, it says, oh, I got another piece of data, I have a SOFIA file according to that geo-referenced coordinate. Open that up and you can see what the inventory would have been for that particular polygon. We are working on that. We're trying to use another database that conservation authorities in Southern Ontario have started using, which is the WSKI database from Kisters. We had a technician actually take the NHIC vascular plant list and update WSKI with the new vascular taxonomic tree, so that now you can start entering in floral data into WSKI. And we've incorporated SOFIA as the tool so that WSKI can import those CSV files into the database very efficiently. So that's why I came up with that CSV export and importing utility specifically for the WSKI database. But if anybody else has another type of database, whether it be Microsoft Access or something else, it's the CSV file that actually you can tailor to what information you want to basically import into your own database.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Dan. Every time you explain new components of the system to me, I'm fascinated, and I'm just fascinated by all the programming that's happened in the background on this. As a user, it's wonderful to have the ability to have access to something like this. So I really appreciate it. And I think looking at the comments coming in, I think other people do as well.
And I really appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation today, because I can refer to this particular presentation as the go-to in case anybody wants to know how to use SOFIA in the future as a basic introduction. And then once they've seen this, and if they have any further questions, once again, you're providing the material of my initial PowerPoint presentation with my contact information. Be happy to troubleshoot anything or answer any questions anybody has.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Dan. And thanks everyone for providing all of your great questions. We really appreciate your enthusiasm and your interest in both of the presentations. We really hope that this session today has given everyone some ideas of ways that they can use technology to streamline their ecological monitoring, tap into volunteer resources, and extend the reach of what they're doing. So we've now come to the end of our session. And once again, this session's been brought to you by the Latornell Steering Committee. So I'd like to thank everyone who helped to make this session possible, including Janet Ivey from Credit Valley Conservation, Katrina Furlanetto from Cataraqui Conservation, Eric Gilbert from Oxford County, Holly Stenberger from University of Guelph, Barbara Mackenzie-Winia from Ontario Nature, and Mario Maye and Karen Anderson of Allset Inc. As we reimagine the future of the Latornell Conference, we hope that you've enjoyed this opportunity to keep in touch. Our upcoming session, taking place on December 9th, is on natural asset management for climate change benefits. We hope you'll join us for that session as well. One more thing to do before you leave, if we still have you, is please complete our exit poll on the screen, which will help us to plan for future sessions. As we've said a few times, this webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the Latornell Symposium website for anyone to watch. Give us a few days to get that up. And don't forget to check out the library of recordings from our other sessions from 2020 and 2021. Thanks again for taking the time today to join us for the Conservation Matters webinar series. I hope everyone stays safe and have a great day.